market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. So let's get more on the markets with Aneeka Gupta, Director of Macroeconomics Research at Wisdomtree. Aneeka, thank you for joining us. There's a lot going on. Equities, like actually that Donald Trump has been elected. A lot more question marks when it comes to the bond market because they worry about inflation. And then crypto, frankly, on a tear.
Absolutely. It's been quite a volatile week. U.S. equities clearly standing out as the outperformer when you look at it versus U.S., Europe, Japan, China, and the rest of the world. Clearly, with Trump, coming into power, you are seeing that advantage towards U.S. markets, given tariff uncertainty, deregulation, reduction of taxes, which is likely to benefit the U.S. economy, as opposed to the rest of the world. So I think that seems to be what's, front and center at play right now.
I mean, when you look at some of the asset classes, I know bonds have been all over the place, and then you have warnings from BlackRock, but also JP Morgan saying, look, it's not done yet, as we try and figure out exactly what kind of inflation brings. Are we going to see more volatility, full stop?
We are going to see volatility, but I think it's important to, reflect a bit on the Fed meeting that we've had. We saw the FOMC clearly bring out the fact that they're not really ready to slow down on their pace of rate reductions. If you look at, the unemployment rate, we've had some success. The unemployment rate has stayed quite low, but broader measures of labor market tightening are beginning to decline. And so that still puts the Fed on course to reduce interest rates. We're still 175 basis points above the median neutral rate. And that just tells us we still are on pace for 3 more consecutive cuts for December, Jan, and Feb, followed by June and September, which will bring us down to about 3.25% to 3.5%.
Aneeka, we have so many question marks, of course, on the cabinet, who's Treasury Secretary. Do you assume that actually over the next 4 years, the U.S. will do better than it is now, which is frankly already very well? There's a lot of jealousy in Europe about some of the growth rates that the U.S. has right now.
So there's a bit of conundrum, Francine, because obviously, if you look at what Trump's mandate is, it is trying to lower inflation, produce real growth, and at the same time, allow for more allow for more excessive fiscal policy. So something will have to give, and I think inflation is what would have to give. And that's why we still see, if you want to still get that growth up, you want to get that fiscal policy more expansionary, inflation will have to be structurally higher going forward. And I think that's where a lot of that, volatility will be emanating from.
So does it also mean, there's volatility, but if you're Mexico, if you're Germany with the spat with Donald Trump, you're feeling quite a lot of heat right now, and he hasn't even started. So what does it mean for those markets?
Absolutely. These economies are facing a lot more volatility and a lot more uncertainty, especially in Germany now that we have, the high probability of the snap elections being called. It's, everyone's looking forward to what is the direction ahead. Polls are indicating that now we have the CDU, CSU, and FDP likely to form the next coalition. And that just tells us, on the positive side, we are likely to see a bit of loosening of fiscal policy. So we're likely to see further strength in supply and demand now that we get an increase in public investment. We're also likely to see lowering of business taxes alongside, a bit more of a control policy on immigration. And which is one of the reasons why we're seeing that positive reaction on the German markets, as opposed to a day when there is quite a bit of uncertainty from the, top headlines.
Bitcoin, forget Bitcoin. It's all Dogecoin. It's all, again. It's not. Is this going to be the big moment for any of these coins because of deregulation?
I think so. I think Trump seems very pro, digital assets. He's embracing it in a very large way, and that just tends to provide a very strong tailwind towards digital currencies on the whole.
Thank you so much for joining us. Aneeka Gupta, their Director of Macroeconomic Research at Wisdomtree. We'll have plenty more, of course, on the Trump trade shortly. Coming up, private equity, the U.S. economy, and what Donald Trump in the White House means for U.S. business. We'll be joined by David Rubenstein, the Carlyle Group co-founder and co-chairman. He also has a great new episode on baseball, so we'll talk a bit of baseball, too. This is Bloomberg. Well, Donald Trump's return to the White House is set to reshape the U.S. economy. The president-elect has promised an escalation of tariffs on all American imports and the biggest mass deportation of migrants in history. He also wants a say in the Federal Reserve policy. So what does this all mean for business deregulation, banks, and private equity? Well, I'm delighted to be joined by David Rubenstein, the Carlyle Group co-founder and co-chairman. He's also, of course, you see him on Bloomberg, the host of the David Rubenstein Show and Bloomberg Wealth. David, so good to speak to you the week after Donald Trump got elected with actually a sizable majority. What will he use it for? What does making America great again, America first, mean for the rest of the world?
Well, clearly he has a mandate that very few presidents have had in recent decades. He not only won the presidency fairly decisively, but he won the Senate or helped the Senate go Republican. It looks like the House will go Republican as well. So he's going to have a mandate to be able to do what he wants. What presidents who've had large mandates have done, like FDR in 1932 or 33, is do a lot of things early. Because your power usually erodes after a period of time. People get tired of your policies, or people who are enemies of your competitors don't like what you're doing. They can gear up and oppose you. But in the beginning, they might not be ready to do that. So I think he'll do a lot of things by executive order in the beginning, a lot of things that don't require Congress to approve it. And he's now trying to get his Senate confirmed people done really quickly, which is to say, get everybody in office right away. Normally, we've seen people take months before they get confirmed, and I think he's going to try to get them all ready at the beginning of the administration.
The markets like this, are they missing something? If he puts loyalists in the cabinet, is there too much danger of like inflation going up and actually businesses being caught in the crossfires?
Well, you never know. Inflation seems to be coming down. I think it's probably around 3% annualized right now, and that's reasonable. But the Fed would like to go down to 2% or see 2% within range. And I think the inflation is coming down. I think the Fed is going to be lowering interest rates, and they may do it one more time this year. But I don't think the Fed is going to have as many rate cuts as was expected just 6 months ago. I think people realize the economy is probably heating up a little bit, and the rate cuts probably wouldn't be helpful right now.
When you look at, the U.S. economy from the U.K., from France and Italy, you think it's the greatest economy on earth right now. I mean, it's firing on all cylinders. What happens next? I mean, we're talking about P and deals being made under Trump. I mean, they've been happening already.
The economy is in pretty good shape in the United States, but President Trump thinks he can do even better, and the economy can do better, which is to say have higher growth. Yeah. The best way out of our deficit and debt problems in the United States is to have 3% plus growth for quite some time in the future. That's the only way we're going to really deal with our debt and deficit problems. And also, I think President Trump would probably like to, I can't speak for him, but I suspect he would like to have more mergers and acquisitions and not have so much blockage as occurred in the previous administration, rightly or wrongly. So I would say he will probably be more of a free market person than his predecessor.
But does the U.S. not need a strong global economy to operate in?
Yes, of course. A strong global economy helps the United States always. And the United States is really fueling the global economy right now. I think we haven't seen all the impact of what the United States is doing. But I think Europe is doing things to try to catch up the United States. Since COVID, the United States has really zoomed past the rest of the world economically. And I think others are seeing what we've done, and I think they're trying to catch up with us, including China as well. China just announced a large stimulus package because they want their economy to grow at something close to the rate we're doing.
David, do you know Donald Trump? Do you think he wants a deal at any cost? Will he do a deal with NATO? Will he do a deal with China?
A good deal maker is somebody that wants to get a deal done, but also recognizes both sides have to get something out of it. So I don't think he wants a deal at any cost. But remember, he has the benefit of having been a president for 4 years, and he now has that experience. And when you're a second-term president, after the first term, there's no interim period of time, you don't have a chance to sit back and reflect on what you could do better than what you did in the first term. Now he's had a chance for 4 years to think about what he could do better. He said that he can get more experienced people. He knows how to pick people better than he did before, perhaps. That's what he said. And so I think he'll have very experienced people in the cabinet, people that are very, very loyal to him, which is a very important thing for him. So I think he's going to reach out to Europe without any preconceptions about what he wants. He's obviously going to reach out to China without any preconceptions, though I don't speak for him. That's my sense of what he's going to do.
But so is he dogmatic? Is this his legacy? Are we going to see the Donald Trump legacy in the next 4 years, or is it something else?
Presidents always begin to think about their legacy toward the end of their last term in office, and I suspect he will think about it. But right now, he wants to get things done. He made a lot of commitments to the American people in the campaign, and I think he wants to honor them. like all candidates do. And I think he really is serious about honoring these commitments. He said a lot of specific things he'd like to get done. Tariffs are a good example. And I suspect he'll follow through on it.
Private equity will go. What does it mean for private equity in the U.S.?
Well, private equity has been, I would say, stalled a bit in the last couple of years. There haven't been a lot of deals, haven't been a lot of IPOs. I think it's coming back now as interest rates go down. And I think the regulatory environment will be much better for private equity. So I think private equity will begin to see, as private credit has already seen, a pretty good increase in investor interest.
Europe private equity has been very lackluster. Does it continue? And is it valuation problems or just financing? The
problem has been the interest rates have been high, and also people worried about a recession. So people who are buyers were afraid if they went in and paid high interest rates and they head into a recession, they look silly. Right. And sometimes the sellers have said the prices they thought they were going to get are not as high as they are now getting. Therefore, they want to hold on longer. So there's been a gap of maybe 10 to 15%, maybe even 20% between buyers and sellers. I think that's going to depress a bit as now we begin to see we're not going into recession and as interest rates come down.
Yeah, but Europe is in a tricky situation. Again, you don't know what happens with Ukraine. You don't really know what happens with gas price. You don't really know what happens with Donald Trump and tariffs.
Nobody knows yet, but I do think there's a sense in the business world that something good is going to be coming forward and that there's more of a pro-business environment going forward, rightly or wrongly. And I think a lot of European leaders are now beginning to say we have to see what's happened in the United States and follow some of the same things. Now, everything in the United States is not going to be perfect. There'll be some mistakes made in the economy. But generally, I think people are very bullish on the economy, which reflects in the stock market. And I think private equity people are probably as giddy as I've seen them in years.
It's true. What's the right way for a European leader to deal with Donald Trump? If you don't want tariffs, but you're not 100% aligned with some of the visions, even with crypto, how do you deal with a very strong personality that wants to get his way?
I think meeting with him one-on-one is usually a good thing to do. I think recognizing the political constraints that he's under, which is to say he made certain commitments, he's likely to honor them. But I think not treating him like somebody who doesn't know what he's doing or somebody who's not as intelligent as they are is a good idea. In other words, I think sometimes European leaders didn't take him as seriously as they should have. And when he says something, he really means it. So I think they'll approach him with a different, I think, sense of respect than they probably did last time around.
And for his cabinet, do you think it's loyalists but business people? So I mean, how does that skew compared to the first time around?
Well, the first time around, President Trump said he wasn't as experienced in picking people, and he picked some people he felt weren't as loyal as he would have preferred. This time, he's picking people he says are going to be much more loyal, and people he's known for a longer period of time. Remember, when he was first elected, he'd never been in government before. He didn't really know all the people who are qualified to be in government. Now he's been around for 8 years, and now I think he feels much more prepared to be president of the United States in the sense of having experienced people around him who know what to do.
But are loyalists dangerous if you're going in the wrong direction because there's no one else to say, Mr. President, wait, you're wrong on this?
Well, there's a balance between telling a president you're wrong and doing it in an effective way sometimes. So his chief of staff is somebody that's gotten along with him for quite some time, and she's told him from time to time, you know, you're not right, but you have to do it in a certain way. Telling him he doesn't know what he's talking about and what he's doing is a big mistake is probably not the best way to approach it, be my guess. You have to use some discretion. But he's a smart person, and he'll get along well with his new advisors. And I think the Europeans and the Asians, leaders around the world, recognize him with much greater respect than they did before. They thought first time he was a bit of a fluke. This time they recognize he represents a trend and it's not just a fluke.
What would you do if you were President Xi right now of China? Would you call him up and invite him to a military parade?
I would try to see if I could meet him as soon as possible. Obviously, inviting him to China is one thing, but offering to come over and meet in the United States is another thing, and they can meet halfway between, of course. But I think having a meeting sooner rather than later is a good policy.
How's journalism? I mean, you ask great questions on your shows, and we're about to talk to, there's a new episode coming out on baseball.
Yes, that's correct.
Fun?
Well, baseball is the American pastime, and historically, now, of course, people think football and basketball have replaced baseball, but I'm a baseball owner, I should disclose, and I had a chance to interview Cal Ripken, who holds the record of playing the most consecutive games in the history of baseball, 2,632 games in a row, 17 years without missing a game. You know, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I know you're talking about, of course, how he did that. So we're going to talk about that next. David Rubenstein stays with us. We'll talk about baseball. That's the first on the pulse, but it's also big business. This is Bloomberg.
never liked the idea because you were a small market team you couldn't compete, because I think competition is in your knowledge. You know, you're drafting, you get to draft, you get to sign players, you get to develop players. You know, that's not all free agency that's happening. But if you're a big market team and you make a mistake in judgment on a player, you can throw more money at your mistakes. When you're a smaller market team, you have to be better at your baseball decisions.
Well, that was Cal Ripken, Major League Baseball Hall of Famer. You can get more of that conversation on this Wednesday's episode of The David Rubenstein Show on Bloomberg TV and online. Well, still with us, Carlyle Group co-founder and co-chairman David Rubenstein. David, I'm sure you had a lot of fun, right, speaking to the legend that is Cal Ripken Jr.
Yes, for people who don't realize what he did, there had been a record of playing in 2,130 games in a row set by Lou Gehrig, a very famous baseball player who had to end it because he came down with ALS. And for some 30 years after that, nobody came even close to touching that record. But Cal Ripken played 17 years in a row without missing a game and barely missed an inning in 17 years. And, you know, as you know, all of us who work generally get some illness at some point in time. But he was an athlete and went to work every single day for 17 years. And plus, he was actually really good at this. He was the most valuable player twice. He won the World Series for the Orioles, so he's quite an impressive player.
I mean, he's incredible, but how did he achieve that? Because a lot of people will look at that and say, well, look, I'm running a company or I'm doing this, and sometimes it's hard to keep going.
He basically toughed it out. In other words, he had illnesses like all of us do, but he just played through them. And sometimes we come to work and we're not feeling great, but we just go through it. And, you know, he's an athlete. He just went through it. Sometimes he was playing for his father, which was his manager, and he didn't want to tell his father, I'm not feeling good today, so he would just play through it.
David, I mean, you know, Cal Ripken is also now one of your co-owners of the Baltimore Orioles. Are you bringing the game to Europe? Like, what comes next for baseball?
Well, baseball is different than football and basketball. It's not quite as global a sport, but I think we're trying to make it more global. It is global in the sense that Japan has a gigantic following for baseball. Taiwan does. Korea does. And Latin America and Central America, there are a lot of baseball players there. Europe, it's not been as popular, but we hope to be able to bring baseball to Europe and make it more popular than it has been.
This is everywhere, or you start with the UK, a bit like American football started here?
Well, I think the UK would be a good place to start, and there have been some games over here, and I think there'll be more in the future, yes.
What are his hopes for the team?
Well, everybody wants to win a World Series. We call it the World Series, even though it's really the U.S. Series. We call it the World Series. But everybody wants to win a World Series. We haven't won one in Baltimore since 1983. It's a long time ago. So I hope as an owner I can help get the team to a point where they can win a World Series. Now, the owner isn't really the person that makes the most important decisions. That's the manager, the general manager. So I'm, you know, sitting there kind of rooting them on and helping a little bit. But, you know, it's kind of difficult being an owner because you can't go on the field and tell these players what to do because you don't really have the expertise. So it's not like running a private equity deal where I can go and tell people this is what they should do. But it's fun and it takes a lot of time.
I mean, what's the hardest? I guess it's building a team that's not necessarily all the best players, but players that work well together.
Well, it's a team sport. And so no one player, no matter how great he is, can make a World Series championship. But there's no doubt that if you have one or two really great players and a couple pretty good players, you can probably win a World Series. And right now, the World Series champion this year is the L.A. Dodgers. They had a great player, Mr. Ohtani, who is very famous because he came from Japan and he both pitches and he also hits, which is very unique.
So you say, of course, you can't be on the pitch, but what's your number one advice to the players if they ask you?
Listen to what the owner says.
The second one?
Play as hard as you can. Don't focus on anything other than teamwork and winning, and everything is a good teamwork kind of enterprise. Baseball is an individual sport, but it's really a team sport, and you've got to work with your teammates to make this thing work.
I mean, there's a lot of questions here in the UK about soccer and private equity coming in here. Is money a good thing because it actually expands it, or are there caveats actually on how much money you should spend?
Well, there's no limits to what money can do. You can't just spend an enormous amount of money and automatically win a championship. Yeah. But there's no doubt that football here, or soccer or football, is very popular in the United States as well. And people watch it in the United States, not quite with the passion that people have it here. And a lot of American money has come over here and bought teams and money from other parts of the world. And I think you'll continue to see that.
David, thank you so much. What fun to have
pleasure.
you in the London studio. David Rubenstein, Carlyle Group, co-founder and host of The David Rubenstein Show, with a great new episode out on Wednesday. It's the 10th season of The David Rubenstein Show. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London, and these are your top stories. Bitcoin tops $80,000 on optimism about a crypto-friendly White House, while European stocks rise, resuming Friday's positive tone on Wall Street. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says he's open to a parliamentary confidence vote by Christmas, potentially speeding up the country's early election to February. Plus, President-elect Donald Trump prepares to meet with President Joe Biden this week to discuss the transfer of power. We'll explore the outlook for foreign policy. Now, tech entrepreneur Dean Forbes has recently topped JP Morgan's 2025 power list of influential Black Britons. Forterro, the software solutions company he founded in 2012, is now valued at €2 billion. Now, he's also a partner at Corton Capital and has helped the firm raise €1 billion fund. Well, Dean Forbes joins us now. Dean, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, there's a lot to talk about because you're in software, because it's a unicorn, because there's, a lot going on in terms of access to capital. When you look at the landscape in the UK, but also abroad, what are you most optimistic about and what frustrates you the most?
Well, we've never really seen a time like this. I mean, entrepreneurs and leaders, we've learned how to run our businesses in downturns. We've learned how to run our businesses in, up markets. But there's so much uncertainty in the market at the moment, it's hard to make long-term strategic decisions and long-term investments. And that's been really frustrating. Nothing seems to be moving. Everything seems to be clogged up and just taking a long time to unwind. Very frustrating.
But this is what, in terms of financing, in terms of access to capital, or is it, what AI means for your business, even what tariffs could mean for Europe?
I think it's a combination for us in tech, the emergence of cybersecurity. So cybersecurity and threats to businesses like ours from a cyber perspective are at an all-time high. We're seeing 1,000% more attempted attacks per week than we were seeing 2 years ago. And then there's the debt markets, just borrowing money that we use to invest in our businesses for the long term. The interest rates have been so high that it's difficult to sustain that for a long period of time.
Dean, when it comes to these cyber security attacks, is it state organized? Is it individuals? And actually, do the nature of these change, which means that you need to also, I guess, be more nimble or clever in how to stop them?
Well, we're a cloud-oriented company, so our customers trust us with their data. They trust us with their information. We're the backbone system that our customers use. So if we were to become, victims of a cyber attack and their data suddenly became out of their reach for that reason, I mean, it's really, really crippling. The rate at which these attacks are evolving is just incredible, right? The defense mechanisms we're using today are very, very different to what we were using 1 year ago, and they're going to be very different again in a year's time.
In terms of sizing for Forterro, how much bigger do you think you can be, and in what time frame?
Well, despite the very challenging economy, we've doubled in size between 2022 and 2024, and our plan is to double again from $2 billion in valuation to $4 billion by 2026. So our rate of growth hasn't been adversely affected by this economic pressure, but the debt and the balance sheet looks quite different to what we expected it would.
Do you need interest rates to go down? And again, we're in a bit of a tricky situation because we don't really quite know what inflation does. Again, nothing's in a straight line.
Right. Well, for sure, we'd love interest rates to come down. Right. That puts cash back into the organisation. That allows us to reduce our debt balance. That allows us to invest. I think if we can't have interest rates coming down, which they're not predicted to come down meaningfully anytime soon, we just want stability. Let's have a constant set of stable interest rates for a good period of time.
Do you think that that's coming? Or again, are there a lot of uncertainties? We also talk about deregulation possibly in the U.S. and how that impacts Europe, and so how it could adversely impact actually Forterro.
Well, we expect interest rates to come down, and we've seen a small move recently, and there's good predictions that we'll see another small downward adjustment before the year is out, which is absolutely welcomed. And then, as I said, beyond that, a good sustained period of continuity and predictability will be absolutely welcomed.
Dean, you have an incredible life story. I mean, you've faced adversity, overcome adversity, gotten to where you have, and I guess you take probably nothing for granted. There are a lot of people watching us that are either going through tough times or will be going through tough times or find it difficult to be in charge of a big organization. Are there life lessons that you've learned along the way?
Oh, for sure. I mean, my number one advantage, and I always say this often, is that having lived with nothing for such a long period of time, I don't fear having little or nothing in the same way as other people who maybe had a more privileged upbringing than I did do. So that really has turned into a bit of a superpower for me. But far be it from me to tell people going through these very difficult times that it's easy or they can just hope their way through it. I mean, these are very, very difficult economic times that we're all trying to make our way through.
But does that change your risk perception?
It doesn't change my risk perception because my business is one that's very, very predictable. Our customers subscribe to us on long-term contracts, and it's normally only insolvency that changes that during those contractual periods. So we have a very downside protected business model. But then you see things like the high street, you see the retail sector, you see hospitality, low margin businesses, extremely volatile. Market conditions and weather conditions can adversely affect those businesses. So that's a very, very different business to bring through an economic situation like the one we're in.
I guess the disruption, everything's being disrupted at the moment. So when do you know if your business idea or your company is not where you need to be? How do you change it to something that's, if not the zeitgeist, certainly where people want to invest and grow in?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in long-term planning, right? Long-term planning that's broken down into years and then quarters, because there's a lot of talk about pivoting businesses quickly, especially in the tech sector. But I think sometimes you can, over-index on pivoting too many times. Often there's a lot to be gained by just being consistent, playing out the plan, learning from mistakes, and making small adjustments as you go.
You're in a number of countries. Do you worry about Germany as opposed to the UK more because of political turmoil, but also it seems to be in the sights of the president-elect?
Yeah, well, Germany is is our biggest, biggest market. We have the highest number of customers there, and it's been a great market for us for many years. The automotive sector has been such a strong sector for the German economy, but we're seeing that sector change now. We're seeing the political situation affecting the economy. Now, all of that being said, I think strong economies continue to be strong economies over time. We expect Germany to come back. We're in the process of doing a large acquisition there, so it's a market that's going through its turbulence at the moment, but we expect it to come back.
But does it mean that you have to pivot to another stronger country or economy to make up for, I guess, volatility in the coming years?
In the short term, you see a bit of downward pressure in one market. Having a business like ours that's distributed across so many different countries and so many different subsectors does allow you to kind of reorient focus for a period of time. But will we be in Germany in 5 or 10 years' time? Well, absolutely. And will the economy be back by then? More than likely.
Well, we hope so. Dean, thank you so much. Dean Forbes, Forterro Chief Executive and Corton Capital Partner, stays with us, and we'll talk a little bit more about access to capital. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to The Pulse, everyone. Now still with us, Dean Forbes, Chief Executive at Forterro and Partner at Corton Capital. Dean, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, you've made it to the power list, so congratulations on that. Are you concerned that there's just not enough access of capital to black founders?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, less than 1% of VC money goes to black and brown founders, and it's a similar statistic for borrowing from major high street banks for businesses. So, that's a known problem. The statistics tell us that that's a problem, and that's something that we absolutely should think about addressing.
But we thought it'd get better, and actually it's not. I was looking at the figures. It's absolutely not getting better. A lot of the diversity and inclusion things that bank had put in place were also being rolled back.
Well, it's a real grassroots problem, right? And I think a lot of banks and financial institutions were well-intended with good measures, well-intended measures to try to change that picture. But then we have to think about, why that happens. Why do black founders need that money? How do they go about sourcing that money? How are they educated about how to, get that money, get that investment, and then how to manage it once they do get it? So it's not just about banks being well-intended and trying to distribute that capital. It's about those founders being ready to pitch for that capital and then put it to good use if they're successful.
So what's the right way, again, to be thinking of this? If you're a founder right now and you say, actually, it's much harder for me to access capital, where do you turn to? Who do you go to?
Well, there are a bunch of firms in the UK now and across Europe and in the US who are focusing on addressing this disparity in the way that black founders are funded. You have organizations like Cornerstone, like Blackseed, here in the UK, who are raising big funds and dedicating them to black and brown founders. So that's one thing. We need more firms like those. We need more of the big private equity and VC houses supporting those types of firms. And then we need other organizations who are educating, mentoring, and supporting those founders to help them get access to that capital and then put it to good use. It's only once those founders put it to good use that it will attract more capital from, VCs and PE firms alike.
Yeah, I mean, good use, but Forterro is really a case in point, right? It's a unicorn. It's worth $2 billion. Does that make a difference in how I guess, banks give access or money, or are you treated differently?
Well, I'm not treated differently now because at this scale, kind of the color situation and this whole topic is no longer a point. But for those founders who are just starting out much earlier on their journey, I will say it's that lack of familiarity between the founder and the institution that often leads to them not being funded. How I help is through FFG, where we do a lot of support for young entrepreneurs, black entrepreneurs, to help them prepare themselves to go and get this money from those organizations willing to invest.
Is this more of a UK problem, or is it really across the board in all countries?
The statistics between the UK and the US, which are probably two of the biggest tech markets with dense black entrepreneur populations, the statistics are very, very similar. So it's not only a UK problem.
Dean, when you look at technology, I mean, we talk again about AI. Is there too much focus on AI and not enough about the backbone, the cloud, the important stuff that's maybe less sexy, but that's really needed to make sure that everything is safe?
Well, we're seeing a bit of a shift in the way people think about AI, right? We're seeing kind of the gimmicky type of AI, which is aimed at, routine tasks, mundane tasks, which is cool and can be helpful to an individual's productivity. But there's also an emerging focus in AI, which is being aimed at system of record, which is being aimed at, production line software and the types of software and technology that is actually producing the output of the organization. And I think that's much more fascinating, far less fashionable, and likely to deliver much greater returns in the long term.
And again, are the incubators in these kind of businesses, how important are they? Does the Labour government, on top of what needs to be done to make sure that actually this continues in the way for the UK, or otherwise business will go elsewhere in Eastern Europe?
Well, we need to see kind of more subsidies for UK businesses, especially tech businesses who are making big investments in AI, because we're early in doing that. And what we learn and the mistakes that we make and the triumphs that we have will inform the rest of the sector to accelerate even faster. So I think that could be an area that government, could look at to help and encourage us to continue to spend money investing in AI.
Dean, thank you so much for joining us today. That was Dean Forbes, Forterro Chief Executive and Corton Capital Partner. Now on to geopolitical news. And the Kremlin has denied a Washington Post report that President Vladimir Putin held a phone conversation with U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. Well, Rosalind Matheson's Bloomberg's EMEA News Director joins us. Ros, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, the fact that they're denying it is not great. Are they likely to speak at some point, or is it, a question mark?
Well, we know they both actually opened the door to having this conversation. We saw that Vladimir Putin congratulated Donald Trump late last week on his election win and said he was willing to talk. Donald Trump said they may talk. I mean, he needs to tread a little bit carefully there, but it's possible they do actually speak before Donald Trump's inauguration. Of course, he's already spoken with the Ukrainian president since his election win and a number of other leaders around the world. The question is there an incentive for both of them to talk before Donald Trump takes office? Certainly there may be. There seems to be a sense that Vladimir Putin's willing to hear what Donald Trump has to say about the situation in Ukraine and the possibility of getting towards talks in that conflict. And would that be advantageous for Vladimir Putin? Quite possibly. So certainly the door is open there. But for now, at least, the Kremlin's denying that conversation happened.
So, Rose, do we know, in terms of priorities, and this is kind of what we're trying to figure out, when President Trump goes into the White House, does he go for tariffs? Does he try to get peace actually in Ukraine? And so do we know who's influencing him? Is it Elon Musk, and how quickly he wants to get something done?
Well, very interesting to see in one of the conversations that Donald Trump had with Volodymyr Zelensky, that Elon Musk got on the phone. He seems to have passed the phone over, and they had a chat as well. And we know that Elon Musk has a strong interest in Ukraine. Obviously he's been supporting Ukraine through Starlink, but he's also got a business sense there as a result too, because of Starlink. And so he's got a lot possibly that he's telling Donald Trump about what he thinks about Ukraine. We do know that Trump has said he will end the war quickly. Hasn't said how, but that's been something he's said a number of times now. And certainly he doesn't really seem to want this conflict to go on after he takes office. And he can claim a win even if he gets it to a frozen conflict in a way, just gets things to de-escalate, he'll call that a win. So he does seem to view this as a priority.
So militarily, what's going on? We also heard a couple of weeks ago about 10,000 North Korean troops at the border.
We know that Russia's bringing those towards the border to buffer their fighting. We know they're actually making further advances now in the east, the southeast particularly of Ukraine, which is that industrial heartland area. They're pressing further south in that push, and so they're really, escalating slightly at this point. We're seeing street-to-street fighting going on in some of these cities. That seems to be Vladimir Putin pressing the advantage in the minute, in a sense, again, that, we're going into a year where either way, financial support for Ukraine is going to decelerate, military support for Ukraine may also taper off. And where does that leave Ukraine? Possibly on the back foot, having to negotiate.
Ross, thank you so much. As always, Bloomberg's MEA News Director, Ross Matheson. Now, coming up, pressure mounts on Olaf Scholz. We'll bring you the latest as the German Chancellor also indicates he's open to an early election. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. Well, French President Emmanuel Macron there and the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer on the Champs-Élysées for armistice ceremony. Now, Starmer is the first British leader to attend the ceremony since Winston Churchill back in 1944. Now, the Paris ceremony does, of course, echo these Franco-British commemoration 80 years ago when Allied troops liberated most of France's territory from Nazi occupation. That's according to Macron's office. We, of course, will follow this very closely to see some of the commemorations. Again, the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer joining the French President at a Paris ceremony marking the 106th anniversary of Armistice today. Now, political turmoil continues in Germany after the collapse of the ruling coalition. Let's get more from Bloomberg's Oliver Crook. So, Ollie, what's the latest on this confidence vote?
Yeah, so Francine, just to kind of remind people on the mechanics here of the German sort of politics, which we're going to be hearing a lot about over the next couple of weeks. Basically, what Olaf Scholz needs to do now is call a no confidence vote in himself. And once he has done that, they can sort of call the federal election, which we're reminding everybody is coming basically a year in advance after the government collapsed a couple last week, I should say. And now basically the question is all around the timing. What he was hoping to do was to call the no confidence vote in January and then have the election in March. Everyone has pushed back against that, and that basically is going to have to come a lot sooner. That is the mechanics. Francine, the other problem we have is there is not a clear sort of path to a cogent government. As you can see from the polls right there, the CDU, run by Friedrich Merz, Merkel's traditional party, even if it were to combine with the AfD, of which there is 0% chance of happening because they said they wouldn't work with the far-right AfD, that still doesn't really even get you to 50% of the vote required to have a sort of a government here in Germany. So the question is, how are these polls going to shift over the next couple of weeks? And will they get to a point where actually only two parties can form a government, particularly coming after that sort of three-part coalition government that really at the end of the day was not able to keep it together and in a moment where Germany really needs that political stability and business stability for the sort of community of business that just want to have predictability at this point.
Ollie, why is Elon Musk picking a fight with Olaf Scholz?
Yeah, so this is really interesting, Francine. So we got to sort of of course, the outcome of the election, and really the first contact between any kind of Trump administration and Olaf Scholz was Trump tweeting, or I should say Musk tweeting, we should say at least in German, he did him that courtesy, was saying Olaf ist ein Narr, which means Olaf is a fool after the government collapsed. And this is really sort of was the first point of contact, right? We understand now that Olaf Scholz and President-elect Trump spoke on Sunday night. But it took a very long time, Francine, for that conversation to happen between Olaf Scholz and the President-elect of the United States. Generally speaking, an ally with the statue of Germany would have that call very sort of much earlier on. And for the government here and for the sort of political situation in Germany, they're looking over at the United States and they need some certainty on the tariffs, because if you get 10% tariffs across the board from German exports to the U.S., the U.S. is now Germany's biggest trading partner. That could have a huge impact on the German economy. It could reduce exports by about 15% to the U.S. and would even be worse for the auto sector, which we know already is in great turmoil. So there's a very high stakes here, Francine, going into what is already sort of thorny relationship.
Yeah, there certainly is. Ollie, thanks so much. Oliver Crook there in Berlin. Now, Bitcoin also hitting a new record, topping $81,000 following Donald Trump's presidential election win. Now, for more, we're joined by Bloomberg's Emily Nicole. Emily, thank you so much for joining us. Bitcoin's on a tear. Dogecoin is on a tear. I mean, there's, a lot is riding on a Trump presidency.
Yeah, I mean, traders are really optimistic about Bitcoin at the minute just because of what Trump has been saying over the last few months. It's been a very big overture from Trump towards the crypto industry as he was fighting to get elected. He's made several promises to the effect of, bolstering the crypto industry's chances. And Bitcoin, being the biggest asset of them all, is the one that is reaping the benefits right now. Yeah,
and there are also now lawmakers that are really pro-crypto. So what kind of, are we talking about deregulation? How could the crypto world change in a Trump world?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, more than $180 million was spent by the crypto industry on trying to get those lawmakers elected. Among the things that Trump has promised is to fire SEC Chair Gary Gensler on day one. I mean, whether or not that comes to pass is kind of up in the air still at the minute, but Gary Gensler has been a very big enforcer against crypto in recent years. Other things that Trump wants to do is have all Bitcoins mined in the USA from now on. He wants to create a strategic reserve for Bitcoin in the US government. So there's a lot of changes that might be positive for crypto, but we'll see what happens exactly with regulation as well later on.
So, Emily, in terms of crypto, I mean, is it Bitcoin? Bitcoin's the biggest, but actually I think Doge was one that moved first the most in terms of percentage.
Yes, so a lot of the smaller coins are also outperforming Bitcoin at the minute. I mean, smaller tokens by nature can be more volatile, and so their swings can be larger. But for Doge in particular, it's a favorite cryptocurrency of Elon Musk, who is also tapped to be part of Trump's administration potentially in the next coming months. And so that was a big mover. We've also seen some of the DeFi tokens rise quite a lot because there are quite a few lawsuits or intentions to sue from the SEC against DeFi players at the moment. And so they're bolstering as well.
Emily, thank you so much. Emily Nicole there with everything you need to know on crypto. Up next, a Bloomberg Brief. Danny Berger, Manus Cranny in New York. And this is Bloomberg.